Old School Tactical is a game system that simulates small unit engagements in World War II and beyond. And Old School Tactical 2 is the second installment in the series, pitting the Americans against the Germans in France in 1944. This is a two-player game of medium complexity. Let's take a look at the components of the base game. The game includes a 30 by 41-inch mounted map board, showing terrain features typical of the French countryside. Each hex on the map represents 50 meters from side to side. The map also includes various trackers to keep track of game turns, impulse points, victory points, and casualty points. The game also includes 3 counter sheets. The counters in this game are large and extra thick. The smallest counters are 5/8 of an inch, and these are for infantry squads, leaders, snipers, and various informational markers. The larger counters are 3/4 of an inch and represent tanks, assault guns, trucks, and even transport aircraft. The game also includes cards. There is a deck of 18 luck cards and 36 unit data cards. The game includes 2 8.5 by 11-inch player aids. These include the terrain chart, which shows the effects on movement, combat, and line of sight of various terrain types in the game. Also, a turn sequence as well as summaries for various game mechanics. The game also includes a 22-page full-color rulebook. This is version 5.5 of the Old School Tactical system, which incorporates changes and clarifications to earlier versions of the rules. I found the rulebook well organized, clearly written, and well illustrated. The game also includes a 20-page full-color scenario booklet. This booklet contains 16 two-player scenarios and 2 solitaire scenarios. And finally, the game includes 4 six-sided dice. Let's take a look at the types of units in the game. Many of the units are infantry squads. These are classified as foot units and soft targets. The front of the counter shows a squad at full strength, while its back shows the same squad at reduced strength. Let's take a look at the information on this German rifle squad counter. The unit's firepower is the unit's attack value. The range represents the maximum number of hexes at which the unit can fire. The defense is the value used when the unit is attacked, and the movement rating represents the number of movement points the unit has. The backside of this unit shows the counter's background split in 2 colors. The red R means that the unit is at reduced strength. The game includes rifle squads like the one shown here, as well as engineer squads, which represent combat engineers, sappers, and pioneer units. These troops have additional capabilities in the game, such as being able to place smoke in their own or an adjacent hex, the ability to reveal and dismantle mines, the exclusive use of the flamethrower support weapon, and they receive a beneficial +1 modifier in melee combat. The game also includes counters that represent individuals such as leaders and snipers. Snipers may not be a part of a fire group nor stack with other units, but they have the ability to individually attack an enemy leader when the leader is stacked with an enemy squad. And when attacking leaders or armor leaders, the sniper's firepower is doubled. Leaders have no firepower rating. They have a defense rating, a movement rating, and a number in a white circle, which is their command range. This is the number of hexes other units must be within in order to benefit from the leader's +1 die roll modifier in rallying and spotting die rolls. Leaders are attached to squads during the leader attach phase. And attached leaders provide a +1 die roll modifier in 2 hit die rolls, attack rolls, and melee rolls. The game also includes various types of support weapons, which are used by squads, and each squad may only carry one such support weapon. The firepower of the support weapon is added to the squad's firepower when it attacks. The support weapons included in this game are light, medium, and heavy machine guns, Browning automatic rifles, mortars, Panzerschrecks, bazookas, flamethrowers, Panzerfausts, satchel charges, and grenade bundles. The game also includes counters that show changes to the battlefield as a result of construction or damage. Cover markers are improvements that can be made by units to their defensive position, and these add a +1 to the unit's defense rating. Foxholes appear as per scenario instructions and also provide +1 to a unit's defense value. The location of mines is secretly recorded by the owning player, and they are revealed when an enemy unit enters their hex. Mines can be revealed and dismantled by engineer squads. Bunkers provide a +3 to a unit's defense value, and units in bunkers may fire in a 360-degree arc. Pillboxes also provide a +3 in defense, but they have a covered arc. Thus, units inside the pillbox may only attack at range inside the covered arc. Smoke may be placed by engineers, mortars, and off-board artillery. It lasts for 2 turns. In the smoke counter phase, all smoke markers are flipped to their smoke 2 side, and all smoke 2 markers are removed from the game. Units in smoke hexes have their firepower reduced by 1, but receive a +1 to their defense value. Units in a hex with a wreck receive a +1 to their defense value. There are various types of terrain in the game, and the effect of terrain on movement and line of sight is summarized in the terrain chart. Some of the terrain types may block line of sight, while others degrade it. The various terrain types are open terrain, roads, farm, wheat field, woods, orchard, bocage, stone walls, rubble, light structures, and heavy structures. There are also multi-level and multi-hex structures. The game includes a deck of 18 luck cards. 1 luck card is drawn at random from the deck by each player at the start of the game. These cards may be used during the course of a player's impulse, and their use does not cost a single impulse point. They are removed once they're used. Unit cards are used as a handy reference for players. In addition to information found on the unit's counter, the unit cards show the firepower value and 2-hit numbers of the weapon at various ranges. At the bottom of the cards is other information denoted by an asterisk. Here we see the turn sequence. It's about 16 steps. Let's go through them quickly so that you can get a sense of the flow of the game. In this game, turns are counted down. So here, in this scenario, the Abbey, the scenario consists of 9 turns. So we place the turn marker in the 9th spot, and if we had concluded the first turn of the game when we're going to the second turn, the turn marker is moved 1 box down to box number 8. So next we check for reinforcements. So here we see the starting forces for the Germans in the Abbey scenario. Remember, the first turn is number 9. So in turn 7, they receive 3 rifle, 1 sergeant, and 1 light machine gun unit. Next step is the attach leaders/weapons step. Leaders are attached by placing them on top of the unit that they are being attached to. Here we see two German squads. The topmost squad is reduced, then we have the leader and a full-strength German squad. So in this phase, we can assign the leader to the reduced squad. And we do that placing the leader on top of the attached squad. In this step also, support weapons can be transferred to another squad in the same hex. Here we see a light machine gun being carried by the reduced German infantry squad. So now it's placed on top of the full-strength German squad in the bottom of the pile. So now it is attached to that squad. Now we deal with smoke counters, and smoke counters last for 2 turns. First, those smoke counters that don't have a number 2 are flipped to their number 2 side, and those that do have a number 2 showing are removed. Now we check for any scenario die rolls. In some scenarios, die rolls have to be made for off-board artillery, like in this scenario, Bourbon for bravery. And in this particular scenario, the US player has 1 artillery strike available at the game's start. Next step is to conduct free rally or bog rolls. And rally die rolls usually cost 1 impulse point per unit, but in this phase they are free. Let's take a look at an example here. Shaken units need 7 or more to rally with 2 dice. Broken units 9 or more. And if broken units fail in rallying, at least they turn into shaken units. Now, a leader which is within command range of a rallying unit will serve as a +1 die roll modifier. So we start by rolling for the shaken unit at the left. The roll is a 12 modified to a 13. The shaken unit is now in good order. We remove the marker. Now we roll for the broken unit, 2d6, and we add 1 for the leader, which is in range. And notice that the range of the leader is the number in the white circle, 1. The roll is a 4 modified to a 5. The rallying attempt fails, but because it's a broken unit, we flip now the marker to its shaken side. And we'll cover bog rolls when we cover situations with vehicles. Now we go to the initiative roll. So now to determine who has the initiative and takes the first impulse, each side rolls 2 dice. High roller has the initiative. The Germans rolled a 6, the Americans an 8, so the Americans have the initiative in this turn. Now we determine the number of impulse points that each side will have. To determine the number of impulse points, we have to consult a specific scenario, and it'll tell us how much we have to add to the die roll. In this scenario, the Abbey, the Germans roll 3d6, and the total would be the number of impulse points they have. The Americans, on the other hand, roll 2 dice and add 3. So let's say that the Germans roll, and the 3 dice produce a total of 12 impulse points. Meanwhile, the Americans roll 2 dice. The result is a 6 plus 3, 9. So the Germans place their impulse markers, one in the number 10 and the other in the number 2 box, for a total of 12 impulse points. Meanwhile, the Americans only have 9 impulse points, so they only place 1 impulse marker in the number 9 box. So now it's the Germans' impulse. They have 12 impulse points, more than the Americans, so they cannot pass. So they can spend either 1 impulse point to activate 1 unit or 2 impulse points to activate a unit group, that is, 2 or more units in the same hex. And players alternate taking impulses, spending impulse points until there's no impulse points left, and then we go to the melee phase. And it is during this phase that we resolve melee combat, where we have enemy units in the same hex with a melee marker. In the next step, we remove unit markers. In this phase, we remove, among others, moved, fired, intensive fire, strike, and acquired target markers. Next, we score victory points. So we check for victory points to see if there's any circumstance that adds more victory points, and if so, we adjust the victory point markers. Now it's the end of the turn, and we would proceed to move the marker to the top again of the turn sequence, unless this is the last turn of the game. And if this is the last turn of the game, we have to die a roll to see if there is an extra turn or not to be played. So each player rolls one die, and if the result is 7 or more, one more turn is played. Here we see the Germans rolled a 6, the Americans a 2, 8. And yes, in this particular example, one more turn would be played. Now if it's the last turn, this is the end of the game, and we check for victory to determine the winner. During the remainder of this video, what we will do is to go through the rulebook, but not in a word-by-word fashion. Instead, I will show you various examples of play which are also included with the rules. This way, if you have the game, you are welcome to set it up and follow along. And if you don't, you will still be able to observe how the game mechanics work. One very important aspect of this game is the use of impulse points, and those vary from turn to turn. In each turn, each player rolls 2d6 at the beginning of the turn to determine how many impulse points they have for that turn. Let's say that we are playing this scenario, which is the Abbey. The Germans would roll 3 dice, and that would be the total of impulse points they would have. The Americans would roll 2 dice, and they would add 3, and that would be their total. So for example, the Germans roll 13 with 3 dice, so they start the turn with 13 impulse points. And the Americans roll an 8 plus 3, 11 impulse points. So we mark the impulse points on the impulse point track. Place one marker in the 10 box and the other one in the 3 box. The Germans have 13 impulse points. The Americans place their markers on their impulse track, and they mark it with 1 in the 10 box and 1 in the 1 box for 11. Now let's say that the Americans held the initiative and they would go first in this turn. Because they have less impulse points than the Germans, they can either go first and spend 1 or 2 impulse points, or they can pass, and then the Germans would have to spend impulse points because their total is greater than the Americans. Always the side that has more impulse points can never pass. Let's take a look at this line of sight example of play. There is a second line German infantry squad in L16 with a heavy machine gun. The squad has a range of 4 hexes, but the machine gun has a 12 hex range. Here we have an American rifle squad in Q17. If we draw a straight line from the center of the hex, where the German machine gun is, to where the American rifle squad is, there is a clear, unobstructed line of sight from the firer to the target. Now we see another American squad in R16 behind a stone wall. However, when we trace the line of sight from the German machine gun, it passes through the hex side of Q15, Q16, which is a wall hex side. So because the line of sight passes through that hex side and the American unit is not in either Q15 or Q16, that hex side degrades the German machine gun's line of sight, and the effect is a -1 on its firepower. So in that case, instead of firing with a strength of 3, it would fire with a strength of 2. Now we see an American squad in R15, and the line of sight passes through an orchard hex, that is Q15. Orchard is also degrading terrain, so again, the strength of the machine gun attack will be reduced by 1. Now we see an American squad in R13. R13 is a clear hex, but the line of sight from the German machine gun traverses 2 orchard hexes, and orchards are terrain that degrades the line of sight. And because the line of sight traverses or passes through two degrading terrain features, that line of sight is blocked. And therefore, the American unit in R-15 cannot be fired upon by the German machine gun. Here we see an American squad in CC-12, which is a hex in a multi-story building. Multi-story buildings are level 2 in height, and any unit in a multi-story building will have the highest height that building has, which is level 2. That unit has a clear line of sight to the German squad in AA-13, which is in a wooden structure. However, that structure, even though it is a level 1 structure, which is lower than the elevation of the firer's position, that structure creates a blind hex, which is Z14. That means that the American squad cannot see the German pioneer squad in Z14. Here, the German second line squad in Y15 does not have a clear line of sight to the American rifle squad in BB17, and that is because of the wooden structure in AA16, which blocks line of sight. The German second line squad has a line of sight to CC16, where there's an American squad. That line of sight traverses hex AA16, where there's a wooden structure, but it doesn't pass through the depiction of the building. In that event, the line of sight is degraded, so the German second line squad would fire with a strength of 2. In this example, the German rifle squad in JJ12 has a clear line of sight to the American squad in LL13, which is in a smoke hex. The American squad would receive a +1 to its defense rating. If the American squad were to fire at the Germans, it would subtract 1 from its firepower because it is firing from a smoke hex. Now, the same German squad has a line of sight to the American squad in MM13. That American squad is in clear terrain. It is not in a smoke hex, but because the line of sight traverses such smoke hex, it degrades the line of sight, and therefore the firepower of the German rifle squad is reduced to 3. Units can only move once per turn, even though they may be activated twice in a turn, but they can only move once per turn. In this example, this American rifle squad in KK-18, a wheat field hex, spends 1 movement point to enter KK-17, an orchard hex, a 2nd movement point to enter LL-17, clear terrain, and spends its 3rd and 4th movement points to enter the woods hex, which is LL-16, expending all movement points. And we place a moved marker on top of the unit. Now, this unit may be activated again during the turn, but not for movement. If it is activated for fire after the unit fires, the marker is flipped to its used side and the unit cannot fire anymore. The only exception is intensive fire, which we will cover ahead. Let's take a look at a basic fire example. Here, the American rifle squad in KK-23 is firing at a German pioneer squad in KK-20, a wheat field hex, clear line of sight, not obstructed. There's no intervening terrain that degrades it. However, the wheat field gives the pioneer unit a +1. That is added to its defense value, so it has a defense value of 5. So the American rifle squad with an attack value of 4 versus the defending unit with a defense value of 5, and that gives us a -1 in the infantry combat table. So we roll 2d6 and apply modifiers. But when we see the modifiers that may apply, there are no applicable modifiers. So we roll 2d6. The result is a C, casualties. So therefore, the defending pioneer squad is flipped to its reduced side. And we mark the casualty point on the casualty track. And the Germans have 1 casualty point. Note that if the total of casualty points reaches the 5 mark, the Germans would have to subtract 1 from their impulse point total during each turn and thereafter. For each 5 casualty points, 1 impulse point is deducted. Let's say, for instance, that instead of rolling a 9, the die roll would have been a 7. The result would be an S, and that means that the unit must make what is called in this game a gut check, and that is a term that you probably associate to morale checks in other games. And if it passes the gut check, nothing happens, but if it fails the gut check, the unit becomes shaken. Each scenario will tell you what is the gut check number for each of the sides, and in this one, which is the Abbey, we see that for the Germans the gut check number is 7. So whenever they roll for a gut check, they will pass if they roll 7 or more. So if, for example, if the Germans roll a 5, they didn't pass the gut check, and therefore a shaken marker is placed on the unit, and units with a shaken marker have their movement factors reduced by half, fractions rounded down, and also their fire power factors reduced by half. Now, on the other hand, if the Germans had rolled, let's say a 9, they would have passed the gut check, and therefore the unit would be unaffected. Now, let's say that instead of a 9 or 7, the die roll was an 8. That is a B. A gut check must be made, and if the unit does not pass it, it is broken. Broken units receive this marker, and they cannot move nor fire. Not even in melee combat, they can't fire back. So this is the most vulnerable state to be in for units in this game. A 10 produces a combined result of casualties, in which case you reduce the target unit to its reduced side, and if it's on its reduced side, it would be eliminated. And you roll for a gut check, and if the unit fails the gut check, it is shaken. An 11 produces another type of combined result, which is casualties and possible broken status if a gut check is failed. And a result of 12 or more produces an elimination result, in which case the unit would be eliminated. There's a limit to the number of actions that a unit can do in a turn. Units are limited to 2 actions per turn. In this game, move, assault move, and fire are actions. After a unit moves, we place a move marker on top of the unit. A move action can only be conducted once in a turn, so that unit cannot move in a later impulse, but it can still fire. And if it fires, we flip the marker to its used side. In this example, the American Rifle Squad is activated. It spends 2 movement points to move into the woods hex, and its last 2 movement points to move into another woods hex adjacent to the German Rifle Squad. And we place a moved marker. So now the unit cannot move in the rest of this turn. It could fire in a subsequent impulse, and then it would be used, or it can conduct an assault move. An assault move costs 1 impulse point per unit. So let's say that it's the Americans' turn again, and they spend an impulse point to activate that same squad that moved for the purpose of conducting an assault move into the hex occupied by the German squad. An assault move into an enemy-occupied hex will cause a melee combat situation, and melee will be resolved later during the turn, so we place a melee marker there. In this game, you can spend 2 impulse points during 1 impulse to move a group, and to do that, there must be an attached leader. So in this case, we see Sergeant Stone, which is attached to the squad that is beneath him, and there's an additional squad, so spending 2 impulse points now moves this whole group, and the group moves at the speed of the slowest unit. In this case, all units have a movement allowance of 4, and we end our move by placing a moved marker on the group. Let's take a look at a melee combat example, but let's say that in a prior impulse, it was the Americans' turn. They activated that rifle squad, and it moved 2 movement points into the building hex with smoke. And of course, we would place a moved marker on the American unit. I'm going to leave it to the side so that we can see the units in action. Now, in a later impulse, the Germans activate their reduced squad with attached leader and fire at the Americans to no effect. And we would place a fire marker on the German stack. Now it's the Americans' turn, and they spend another impulse point to activate the rifle squad to make an assault move, which is the only way you can enter a hex that is occupied by an enemy unit. So the American squad is used, cannot conduct any more actions. However, because it entered a hex with an enemy unit, we will have melee combat, and that is signified by placing a melee marker on the stack. Now, all these actions that you just saw occurred during the play turn phase. Melee combat occurs in a separate phase after that. So let's say that we're now in the melee phase. And now we will solve melee combat. Let's leave the melee marker in the hex where the combat takes place. So now we have to calculate the attack of the American squad versus the defense of the Germans, and then the attack value of the Germans versus the defense of the Americans. And each one of the sides will roll once on the Infantry Fire table, and the combat results are considered simultaneous, so there's always a chance that both sides will eliminate each other. So the Americans have a high explosive factor of 4. There's a +2 die roll modifier for melee combat that you apply to the attacker. So now they have 6. On the German side, the squad's defense is 4, and there is a +1 modifier for an attached leader. So the Germans would have a total of 5. So it is 6 against 5, a +1 for the Americans. We locate the +1 column on the infantry combat table, and we roll 2d6. See the possible modifiers. Moving fire doesn't apply. This is melee combat. The Americans don't have an attached leader. That doesn't apply. There's no height advantage or disadvantage. This is not an ambush. There's no shaken unit present in the melee combat, nor any elite engineer assault or shock unit involved in the melee. And no poor quality unit either. And intensive fire does not apply. So there's no modifiers in this particular combat situation where the Americans are attacking. We roll 2d6. And the roll is a 10. That's a combined result. Casualties, and we have to roll for a gut check. And if the Germans fail, they will be broken. We'll make a mental note that the Germans must suffer a C-B result. But first, let's roll for the Germans. They have a firepower, high explosive firepower factor of 2. They have a leader, so it would be 3. And we apply the melee die roll modifier of 2, 5, versus the American squad's 4 defense. That is a +1. In this case, the Germans get a +1 die roll modifier because of the attached leader. So we roll on the +1 column and we add 1 to the die roll. And Germans rolled an 8 modified to a 9. Another combined result. Casualties and shaken if the units fail a gut check. So let's apply first the American attack result, casualties, and a possible broken result. The Germans have a reduced squad, so if we reduce that squad, it's removed from the game. So we do so, we remove the squad from the game. We add 1 point to the German casualty track. And because its attached squad received a casualties result, we have to roll for possible leader casualties for Lieutenant Berger. In this case, because his attached squad was eliminated, we have to roll 1d6. And on a 1, 2, and 3, the leader is also eliminated. Fortunately for him, a 6 So he survives for now. Now we have to apply the C-S result that the Germans obtained against the American squad. So we apply 1 casualty point against the Americans by flipping the infantry squad to its reduced size. So now the American casualty point score goes by 1 to 3. Now we have to conduct a gut check on the American squad. Notice that we didn't do so for the German squad because it was eliminated. So we roll 2d6, and we have to roll higher than its morale value. And as per scenario instructions, the gut check level is 7. We have to roll 7 or more for the unit to pass. So we roll 2d6, and the roll is a 4. It did not pass, so we place a shaken marker on the American squad. After combat, all shaken and broken units must retreat out of the melee hex. The owning player chooses which one, so they are retreated into the adjacent buildings hex that has smoke. And we place the used marker on top, and leaders that are without any attached units also have to retreat. So Berger retreats out of the building into the open, and we place the fired marker that was on top of his group, and that ends that melee combat situation. In the next phase, remove unit markers. We would remove the fired and used markers that we see on the screen. Let's take a look at an example involving opportunity fire. The Germans have a machine gun in BB9. It has a fired marker. It has fired before during this turn. The Americans have an engineer squad in CC15, and on a prior impulse, the American engineer squad placed smoke in an adjacent hex. That counts as a fire action. It can still move. So let's say now that it's the American player's turn. The Americans spend an impulse to move the engineers. The engineers move 1 hex, sending 1 movement point into the hex with the smoke. The Germans call a halt, and they will execute opportunity fire. The German machine gun has a firepower factor of 3. The Americans have a defense of 4, but they're in a smoke hex, so that adds 1 more point to their defense for a total of 5. So that's a -2 attack. Let's say that the result of the attack was no effect. The German machine gun would now be used, and the Americans can continue moving. They have 2 more movement points, which they use. The wooden building. They had fired before, and with that move, they are also used. And because the result was such that did not halt the movement of the American unit completed its move, and we placed the used marker, and the next impulse is for the Germans. But let's imagine that instead of an ineffective attack, the result of the attack was that the engineer squad was broken. So we would place a broken marker on the moving American infantry squad. And because the result of the opportunity fire was such that it halted the move of the enemy unit, now the next impulse returns to the moving side. So now the Americans have another impulse, so they can activate some other unit on the board. So we saw that the German unit was used in executing opportunity fire against the now broken American engineer squad. Let's say that the Americans moved an infantry squad in front of that stone building. The Germans have a clear line of sight, but they're used. The only way they can fire is if they declare intensive fire. So let's say the unit fires. There's severe penalties for intensive fire, like a -1 to the unit's firepower rating, and if conducting a 2-hit die roll, it would also have a -1. And in addition, the unit becomes automatically shaken. So let's say that the German machine gun fires. The American squad received no adverse effect. Now the German unit is shaken. And we leave the intensive fire marker to signify that that German unit cannot fire anymore this turn. So we've reached the end of this video. In part 2 of 2, coming up we will show you how armored fighting vehicles fight and move in this game. We'll give you examples of combat between armored fighting vehicles and between them and infantry units. In addition, we'll show you the airborne expansion and other components of this game system. So, this is Stuka Joe signing off for now. Thanks for watching.